Hi, I'm Michelle, and I want to review for you my favorite homeschool curriculum, which is from Heart of Dakota. And they are based out of the Dakotas, which is why they call it Heart of Dakota. And the author is Carrie Austin. She was an educator for many years before she decided to homeschool her own four sons. And then her sister also has three sons, and they're a family run company. And I just love them because I can call and ask a curriculum question or a question about ordering. And usually I get a phone call back from Julie, and I've had many conversations with her, and she's so kind and helpful. And it's so family centered that I think that was one thing that drew me to it. And also the fact that every story I hear on their end is about boys, and I have four boys. And so I was looking for a way to educate my sons that would be good for sons. And I just have really, really enjoyed their program. I did another video on the Little Hearts for His Glory, which I used for my kids for kindergarten. And this video is going to be about Little Hearts for His Glory. Now, I use this for first grade. There are others who use this for second grade. It just depends on what they're looking for. Basically, though, it's from ages 6 to 8. So it kind of depends on the level of your child and where they fall on the website. There is a placement chart, and you can look in and say, okay, well, my child is at this for reading, is at this for math, is at this for science, and it kind of gives you a general level where they can fit in. And anyways, my kids have fit on the younger end of it. And what's always interesting is even at the beginning of the school year, if certain areas seem a little bit challenging, always by the end of the year, they have grown in increments as they get towards the end of the book, to the point that the last month of the book is just cake. I mean, everything they're doing is like, okay, I'm confident, I know what I'm doing, and they've grown so much that it's a great achievement to get to see that. So let me just walk you through though why I love this curriculum so much. One of the main reasons is because I used to be a teacher in high schools, and I would have just curriculum books everywhere to have to pick out from and choose what I was doing. But this all comes in one spot. So when I go to my day, it has these boxes, and each box has its own thing, and they're almost just like checklists is what I would call them. Now, everyone gets their own rhythm. I like to start my day at the breakfast table, and that's where we usually start our first two boxes. And then since I have four boys, doing two boxes for each person is kind of why I only get to do two boxes. But so in Beyond Little Hearts for His Glory, in the history, which is what I do at breakfast time, the first bit of time you're going to be reading in the Bible. Well, no, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. On day 5, you're going to be reading stories from the Bible. So day 1, 2, and 3, you're going to be reading from a different history book to prepare with a theme. So the theme for this week, for example, was Pioneers from England Settled Jamestown. So in this one, a lot of this year is focused on kind of like the beginning of getting to America through expansion into the Wild West. So the first 4 days of every unit, you're going to be reading from one of the history curriculums. Here's one of them. This is a great book. They're very Charlotte Mason style, where they're story-like, and they can get into it because they're usually told from a child's perspective. Also this one I will say is a little old-fashioned in some ways. So you do have to be cautious when you get into stories with Indians. Sometimes there's words that I wouldn't really use, but again, be smart as you read through a story. Just in your head, just switch it up so that they might have a more maybe appropriate way of saying certain terminology. And then this was a great book. Again, similar stuff. You just always have to be prepared for words that have gone out of style or just maybe aren't as PC. But all of these stories, again, tell stories from the perspective of a child in the midst of history. So they were really good hits with my kids. They were able to pay attention to them and answer questions. So normally from day 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're going to be just reading about it. Every so often they may ask some questions in there as well. But then down below, let's see, but is another activity. Now on this page, it happens to be science, but on day 1, it's also science. Day 3, geography, and day 4 was a history activity. So I'm sitting at breakfast, I read my history story. Then one of these second boxes always relate to the history that you just read. So for example, you might have a story reading about gold, and in the science book, you're talking about gold and the minerals and those kind of things. She always gives text that you can read. She also gives activities or materials that you might need. And then at the bottom is a textbook connection. Now, the part that, again, people have commented on other websites is that the science is weak and, oh, my poor precious can't do this science. Well, honestly, this science is simple, but it relates to what you're doing. So what's nice is you're flipping all around this book. If you're a person who likes to go through methodically chapter by chapter, this is not the book that you're going to be liking very much with this. But what's nice is when she tells you to go to a certain page, like here, if you're talking about gold, here's a whole page about minerals and gold, and it's going to talk about that. Now, there are activities in the book. You can do those if you want to, and sometimes she will have you do an activity or a science experiment related to what's in the book, or she creates them on her own, and then you just get to do them alongside them. My sons love science, so when we would get to this section, after we did the activity or read the stuff, if I realized, well, maybe they'll want a little bit more with this, we would either watch a Magic School Bus episode that would kind of highlight the information, or some YouTube science videos for kids are great things to be able to supplement, kind of stick it in the brain a little bit, but not overwhelm them. I think I realized that after teaching this curriculum the second time, it was like I realized, yes, my child loves science, but sometimes if there's so much within a short period of time, it can overwhelm them. So what I started to do is kind of take cues from them. If there was a topic they really liked, then we would dig deeper. Or if they were telling me information about, anyways, my one son, he likes to do like fizzy science experiments. So we might do an additional experiment on a Friday afternoon or a Wednesday afternoon where he would then be able to get his like fizzy science out. But overall, I liked the science related to the history, and I just liked the relation of it versus just like, okay, we've done our history, check. Now let's go to science and something completely random. That's one thing I really, really liked about it. So then after my kids usually have a chore time and I'm, moving laundry around or something, then we settle down at the table and I would do table time. And this is where we're getting to the rest of the things in the book. So let me see if the light's not too bad. We have a poetry section. Now the poetry section is really, I think, neat. Now I don't know if they've updated this manual yet, but I think eventually she's trying to get these to have like an actual notebook section. But what I loved is that my kids were able to make their own. Now with boys who are growing in their handwriting, I don't know about girls, I'm sorry, but they would I'd have them every day copy a little bit of the poem. Now the poems are in the back of the book. They're really beautiful poems too. And they're simple, they're in the back of the book. There's just one every unit. And what was nice is I found again that it usually related to the history topic we were talking about that week. There was some relation, like we were talking about traveling on a boat, the poem would be about boats. So then what they would do is I'd have them copy, or in the book it would tell you to copy. And then one of the days they got to draw pictures. So at the beginning of the year, we'd have writing that looked a little bit like this because they're still growing in their writing. But as the year went on, we'd practice. Maybe I'd make a copy of it, and then they would write around it and get their writing a little bit better, draw some pictures still. And then what they have is they've got this. My son struggles with handwriting, so it wasn't very beautiful. But what was nice is that by the end of the year, they grew confident, and they're practicing their writing and drawing skills. So I thought that was pretty cool. And now he's got this collection of poems he can use. So I've had 2 sons do that so far, and both of them enjoyed it. They may have complained a little bit about the copy work, but I remember that they're building their muscles and they're growing them. So it's not going to look beautiful, but they're practicing their handwriting in a non-formal way, and they're having fun in the end. So that's the poetry section. And then there's always a Bible study on here. Usually you're going to have a Bible verse for the week, what I would do is I would just write them. This is bad copy right now because I've used it too many times, but I'd have one each week, and then they would just use this to help them write it. I probably should do that on a note card next time. But then what's great is usually these verses would correspond with one of the Steve Green Hide 'Em in Your Heart CDs that comes along with it too. So in here, for example, it says, read the verse out loud. There's some questions about the verse that kind of ties it in to what's going on in their life. And then it has each day a different way to practice it so that they can get it memorized. And usually it involves activity, whether it's bouncing or sit-ups or arm circles. It's just some way to get them moving. And then at the bottom, it'll say music. And that's where it'll tell you the music track that it's on there. The way I started to do that was to put it on, and I'd say like, okay, you're going to do this while jumping on the trampoline. So they listen to the song, jump on a trampoline, so that they're moving again even more. So that this was a nice break if they would have been sitting down for a little while. It was like, okay, it's Bible time. And then they got to move around during that section. So again, I forgot to finish this up before, but related to Bible study, after you've had 4 days of history and unit things, when you got to day 5, this is when you kind of hit a meatier section of the Bible. So on that day, instead of a history reading, you would read a longer passage of the Bible, and it would go into depth in a story that kind of relates to the history unit for that week. So in this case, it's at the end of the pioneers from England settled Jamestown, and you're reading about Ruth. And then underneath it, there's a key idea. She always writes these as like a summary. And she said, the pioneers could have given up and gone home. Just like Ruth, they faithfully stayed. God blessed Ruth for her faithfulness. Even though the pioneers had many hard times, God was watching over them. And so then after you've read that, your Bible study for that day 5 has all these questions about that verse. So it allows them to go deeper into it. So again, this is a very friendly curriculum overall, but you're going to be reading in the Bible or practicing a Bible verse every day. So you are getting that in there. So that is the left side of the page that she calls the learning through history. And so those ones all usually relate together really well. And then on the other side, learning the basics, this is where you're going to be getting into the other topics that you're practicing. So language arts, you're either going to be doing spelling practice or grammar. Now spelling, you see these ones, there are 34 units and each unit has its own list of spelling words. So I usually would just make a note card and write the unit up on top. And then when we were done with that unit, we would place them in a little card box in alphabetical order. So they would practice alphabetical order, and then they would use their spelling. Now, what's fun about their spelling is usually what would happen is the first day they just get introduced to the words, and then they'd maybe practice writing them. And then the second day they might write them on a whiteboard. And then the third day they might practice writing out sentences with 3 of the words. So it's a good way to practice. And if your child is not good at spelling, it does give some correction ideas as well. My second child that did this was super active. So for him, I would make him do what he called couch falls. So he'd stand on the couch, I'd give him a word, and he would spell it as he would fall to the couch, because that made him practice it. And that was something, again, that got him moving, which was good for him. On day 5, just like you're changing it up with the history a little bit, you're also changing it up with not doing spelling. So it's 4 days of spelling. The 5th day is a grammar lesson, but she writes it in there. So she'll tell you what it is. You have your script that you get to say, and then there's usually some kind of a practice or a writing thing that you would do to do that. So what's nice is it's simple. It's a simple introduction to grammar. It's not going to overwhelm them, and it's something that they all can do. Now, the other things on this page, of course, is math. The nice thing about Carrie's program is that you can choose your math. She writes in here, sorry, the glare, related to Singapore math, and sometimes there's activities in here too. So it's not just like, okay, here's page XYZ. It's also maybe an activity to practice that concept. So the Singapore 1A, or for my second son, he really liked it because math is really easy for him in general, because he does it all in his head. So my biggest complaint with him was like, you've got to show your work. So a lot of the work was simple, but it's a lot more than last year's work. He had a lot more problems per page, and still doable, but something that he has enjoyed doing overall. Also practiced his handwriting, which was important too. So if you do Singapore, you've got 2 workbooks and you'll get to do those throughout the school year. They are written in here, the page numbers. If for whatever reason you're doing this program as a second grader, in the back of the book, she also writes, or she also has a, not a supplemental, but like an alternate schedule if you have a different, if you're doing the 2A books for here. So that's nice too, is that it's in here if you decide that you needed to be up a level in math, but you're at this level and everything else. If you also want to with math, you can choose a different program. If your kid is a hands-on learner, I've heard that Matthew C is really great. I have also heard good things about Life of Fred. I've never done that before, but my point is pick it for your child. If your child needs a certain way to do math, then you need to do that. We like to do Math Seeds as a complement sometimes, and that has been helpful for them too, to have some computer-based math practice. Now, why Carrie picked Singapore, I know, is because it's shorter lessons, and that's really important, especially if you have a bigger family. I don't have time to sit and do 45 minutes of math with my son because I have 3 other kids who need my help and assistance in their work. So most of the time, Singapore math gets them to practice a concept in a short amount of time so that they master it and are able to move on a little bit quicker. Now, as I'm getting higher up in Singapore with other levels, I've noticed that it takes a lot more time because the concepts are just getting harder. But at this level for first grade, I'm totally fine with short and sweet lessons because that's what they need. The last 2 sections are one of my favorites. So at this level, it depends on your child's reading level. So they have a choice for the reading. One of them is a phonics program. So if your child is not reading or really needs practice with it, then they need to do a phonics program. On the curriculum website, they will show you the options for those. Again, I've done Reading Eggs before, and that's a really great program as well. But if your child is already reading, then you're going to start this thing called Scheduled Books for Emerging Readers. Now, emerging readers, their program is wonderful. I'll show you the books here in just a second, but that is one section that you will have to turn to the back of the book to find the schedule for that. So I always just keep a Post-it note in the back to show what is. So every day, so it'll say Unit 1, Day 1, it'll tell you what book you're reading from, it tells you the page numbers, and again, you can even pick some of those, like for the first however many weeks you're reading from the early reader's Bible or the beginner's Bible, and it'll tell you what pages to pick, and then it gives you 2 or 3 questions about that reading. So it's not, so they get to read out loud to you, so you can listen to them, make corrections if you need to, but also there's questions, so you know, are they paying attention? Are they getting it? Are they understanding it? And what's great is the questions have been, my kids have been able to answer them pretty well. So besides the beginner's Bible, you're going to get a huge collection of readers that your kids will do awesome with and that they're very interesting. So you've got ones like Owl at Home. This was a really great book to read about some science, and they were able to read about animals. First Flight about the Wright brothers, another Frog and Toad, or 2 Frog and Toad books. They love those. The voices are so fun. Wagon Wheels, a great story of a family going out west, and it's based on a true story. Amelia Bedelia. I mean, who can't love Amelia Bedelia? One of the funniest stories. I think, yep, Buffalo Bill and the Pony Express, another Western. Prairie School, great story too. Oh my, is this one of the ones? Yes, Tornado. This is one of those that's just any dog story is always a good story. If you like Little House books, you've got this one. Bears on Hemlock Mountain, very cute story. And a classic, The Courage of Sarah Noble. Now what's nice is they're reading through all of these throughout the year, plus the Beginner's Bible, and they'll excel at this. By the time they're reading, and it's special time with you, you get to cuddle, you get to be together, and that's just one of my favorite times was that time. The last part of the box that you have to check off is story time, and you get 5 days of story time. Story time is when you get to read to them. So while as the emerging readers, they're reading to you, this is your time when you read to them. I like to either do this at lunchtime or like when I'm just in the middle of the day where we can just sit together and read. So what they do for story time is each day it'll tell you to read a section of a genre. So they give you, I don't remember if it's 8 genres or not. So they'll say read a portion of it, and then they'll give you an activity. So sometimes it's practicing to retell the information. Sometimes it's acting out the information. Sometimes it's just answering some questions about it. And then other times you're doing a character quality. So it might bring a Bible verse in and say, okay, let's look at the quality of brotherly love. How is the main character showing brotherly love, or how is he not? And then asking some questions about it too. So what I like is that there's lots of great activities in here. But one thing that isn't in there is the page numbers. So when you are getting ready to, it'll say on there, coming soon, you need to pick a biography to read. And in the back of the book, in one of these sections, it gives you, this is another choice section. So like when you're in historical fiction, it's giving you choices. Now in the, on the curriculum website, when you're ordering it, you will be picking which ones you want. And I think there's examples of classic. I don't know if there's boys and girls in that level or not. I'm not remembering. But the point is that all the books are really good choices, and you can, if you read one and you're like, I don't like this, and maybe you have another child coming up, you can switch. There's a lot of options that are there. So what's great is the books that we read, they go through different genres. So like for nonfiction, you're reading this one, which can be a little bit boring, but what's great is they're reading some facts and they're learning some interesting things about life in New York City over 100 years ago. When you get to mystery, for us, we read Who Stole the Wizard of Oz? Mountain Born. Now this is a tough book to read out loud to a first grader because it's deep and there's a lot of depth with the characters, but also the storyline. But what's interesting is you really start to like the characters by the end of the book. So it does, I like that she goes deep into some of them too. Mr. Popper's Penguins was one of my son's favorites. It was such a funny book. We haven't seen the movie yet, but we loved the book. Another good classic, The Sword in the Tree, or In the Tree. Sarah Witcher's story, based on a true story. Very interesting. When you get the biography, I think it's biography. William Henry Harrison, another great story. The Cricket in Times Square, we loved this one. And then for fairy tale, we did The Apple and the Arrow, which is a legend of William Tell. Again, they're not always easy books to describe to a child, but what's nice is that it gets their ear understanding what they're listening for, and they really, by the end of the year, they're listening, and it's preparing them for the next level when they're going to be doing some of those deeper readings and have to retell information from there. So anyways, I really, really love Beyond Little Hearts for His Glory, and I love the entire Heart of Dakota family because it's a simple and wonderful way to dive into the Bible, to dive into history, and to dive into some life skills that they are going to keep, hopefully, planting some seeds for the rest of their lives. And I said this on my other video. Don't pass this up when you see it online and you look at other places. It's not going to look like the fanciest. It's not going to look like it's got the most up-to-date toys and tools and all that stuff. But you're getting, this is like solid meat. This is going to stick with you for a long time. And it's simple enough that you're not going to be spending 5 hours a day per kid doing this curriculum. With some of my sons, they were able to rush through this in an hour and a half, and others might take 2 hours if they're having a lot of fun learning about the science that day. So just know that there's a lot to this curriculum, and I've gone through it twice now, and I've really, really liked it. You may feel for a while that you're kind of stuck with the Pilgrims for a long time because you're focusing on this one lens of American history, but there's a lot of really interesting things you're going to learn too. So there's my thumbs up for Heart of Dakota, and I will be bringing another video soon. Thanks. Bye.